The Grim Drive podcast explores mental health through the lens of professional sports and athletes. Pro athletes come forward more and more with stories about their mental health journey, what they have endured, and how they managed to push through, reflecting a mental health stigma that continues to be reduced. Pro athletes also leverage mindset to achieve peak performance, as well as representing and often driving elements of popular culture through the use of social media, technology, and personal branding. This places athletes front and center as role models for people of all ages, giving them a platform to reach many and deliver important information, including information about mental health. Welcome to the Grim Drive podcast, where we explore mental health through the lens of professional sports and athletes. Today, we're going to be doing a little recap episode and talking about Grim Drive as a term, right, as a concept. So we recap, we like to, after the first 10 episodes, we did a quick recap episode, just to kind of get into like the topics we discussed in episodes 1 through 10, the players we discussed, any kind of key takeaways for 11 through 20. So we just finished our next 10 episodes. Pretty proud about that. And I feel like we, anytime you make it to 20, you realize you've stuck with it enough to kind of see it through. And I think we feel like we're kind of coming into our own a little bit.
Yeah.
It's a little more comfortable. When you start something new, it's hard. It can be awkward. There's a learning curve.
Only took 20 episodes.
Oh yeah, no big deal. We're just getting started,
Just
people.
getting
Okay,
started.
so wait till you see what's coming next. So just a recap. We did 11 was Kyrie and communication. We did Justin Forsett and financial literacy, Simone Biles and mental fitness, Shamikwa Holtzclaw and adjustment, Ben Gordon and bipolar, Brandon Marshall, Jackie McMullen and mental health and sports media, Julie and Zach Ertz, or the Ertzes as we call them, and relationships, David Beckham and OCD, and then Tiger Woods. I think I love the fact we had a very diverse group of athletes. We had a very diverse group of topics. We really try to touch on, again, mental fitness, mental health, mental illness. We try to really cover. We don't want to, not uncover one area or focus too much on one. We tried to really spread it out, which I think was great. Any specific episodes that kind of stood out to you, John?
The two that I really enjoyed were the one where we talked about Simone Biles, and again, a little bit biased because it's a lot of the stuff that she talks about was very much aligned with the work that I do specifically with athletes. So that one definitely stood out because she's just, aside from just being a phenomenal person and athlete, like she's got the right mentality, and I feel like she's a really, really great example of an athlete who's doing it the right way.
Yeah.
And it was just great to showcase that of like the work she puts in on the mental side of her preparation and how she structures it and how she does it is just like perfect, which no surprise, she's pretty much perfect when she does her routines. So that one was really, really cool because we got to get into some of the stuff that like I really love talking about. So that one really stood out to me because that was an exciting one for me. And then the other one that was kind of a surprise for me that I really enjoyed was when we were talking about the Ertzes. I actually really enjoyed that episode because we got into talking about relationships and the importance of relationships and some of the pitfalls of relationships, because I think that specifically for guys, and this is a mass generalization, but specifically for guys, relationships are harder because harder in the sense of like that emotional language and the communication of being able to like the vulnerability that's necessary for relationships to grow is hard for a lot of guys to access, and to have an example of two people in that like stratosphere of athletics, right, especially successful athletes, was great to talk about how they make it work. Their relationship's a little bit different than maybe more traditional ones in the sense that I think they only see each other like 4 months out of the year or something crazy like that. But it was I really enjoyed getting into like the nitty gritty stuff about relationships and the importance of understanding like the idea of like, how do I need to receive love? How can I give love to my other partner? How those might not be the same. How to really communicate with people so that you're both being heard but also being listened to. I mean, it was just a really cool episode that if you haven't had a chance to listen to, I highly recommend it because that one was really, we got into like the love languages and all this really, really cool stuff. So those are the two that I really like will want to highlight of if people haven't had a chance to go back and listen to, highly encourage going back and listening to.
No, and those are great examples. I think some of our episodes, especially if they're on like topics of like mental illness are a little bit more about, the therapy approach or how a person can kind of navigate that if they're dealing with it specifically. And then other episodes like the ones you mentioned are much more broad in terms of the reach of the people that can obviously relate to these things. Mental fitness is something that's growing in terms of a concept, and handling mental health from a proactive standpoint, really taking it seriously. Like I think the example we gave was like brushing teeth and flossing, right? At some point, mental fitness strategies and things people do are going to become just as routine as that kind of stuff.
Everyday tasks.
And I think it is really important for people to look at it that way, because it's going to save you. You invest in yourself on a day-to-day basis when it comes to your approach to mental fitness. You save yourself from having to go through different possible mental health or mental illness issues down the road, because you're putting in that time to keep yourself in a good place. It's a form of self-care. I think mental fitness is a little bit of its own thing, but it is a form of self-care. And then the relationship thing. I mean, look, when it comes to the Kyrie and communication episode is kind of sort of can be related to that. So I encourage people to kind of listen to both the Kyrie and communication episode.
That was a good episode too.
And the episode on the Ertzes and relationships, because communication and relationships go hand in hand. And it's not like we're born with this information. I mean, it really is kind of like a nuanced thing that you have to learn about and you have to work at in order to make it work, or otherwise things are going to kind of blow up in your face a little bit. We see that a lot with people, where relationships that could have been salvaged just go south because people don't understand how to communicate in an effective way, or their ego gets in the way, or they're not taking care of their own happiness or be able to drive that without someone else, the external validation, someone else doing it. So definitely those two episodes. And then, so for me, Justin Forsett and financial literacy was great, because I think, we're passionate about financial literacy and financial freedom being a topic that, we feel like needs to be taught more in schools. And we work with a lot of young people that don't, really have not come across this types of information. And I think it puts them in a difficult position when it comes to establishing themselves and having that kind of, freedom and flexibility in their life to feel like they're in control. Right. And it definitely reduces stress levels too. So financial literacy is a topic that I thought was great that we covered. And then Jackie Mack and mental health and sports media, I thought was pretty cool. I mean, I got to complain about referees. So, like, anytime I get to do that, it's like, it's going to stand out to me in a good way. It was my own form of therapy. So thank you, John, for being in the ear for that. And then we're interested in the topic of mental health and sports media and where sports media is going to go with that. I think it's come a long way, especially in the last 3 years. And I don't know that it has to keep coming farther. I mean, I think we talked about that in that episode, where like maybe we're putting too much pressure on people in the media to be mental health experts. And instead of doing that, let's just take things with a grain of salt, understand that's not their area of expertise, and maybe bring in other people like ourselves or someone else that actually knows about this stuff and can provide like a balanced perspective. I thought that was a pretty cool episode as well. So we're going to talk a little. So that's like a quick recap of our last 10 episodes, and I want to talk a little bit about Grim Drive as a concept, right? Because I think it's like, I'm sure there's people out there like, Grim Drive, what is that? Like, if you have the word grim in your title, like, what does that even mean? And so for me, I mean, I think I want to clarify that a little bit, because I think it's, we've talked about it. We talked about it in our pilot episode, I think in the first episode 0, talked about what kind of Grim Drive is, and that's tied to like, relentless pursuit of purpose and passion and purpose-driven goals and things like that. I think the reason we have the word grim in the title is kind of a couple. I think one, when you're trying to achieve anything that's worthwhile and that ties into something bigger than yourself, it's not going to be a pretty picture. I mean, let's call a spade a spade. I mean, like it takes hard work. Things do get grim. There is adversity. You got to be able to push through and keep an eye on the prize, keep an eye on the purpose and the passion behind what you're doing and how it ties into something bigger than yourself. It's going to get grim. You got to push through that. And then also, it's kind of like a built-in joke into the title, right? We always we're always joking about this. Like, we put grim in the title because if you're like, grimly driven, it means you're just a workaholic. And that is not about what we're trying to support, right? I think a lot of times I see this on social media where people, they kind of fluctuate from being like supporting hard work versus like condemning it because it's fetishizing workaholism. And I think it doesn't have to be all the way to that level. I think just because people love what they do and they work hard doesn't mean they're workaholics. And I think that although it's good to have that in the back of your mind, I think that's why we have grim in the title, because it's like, if your whole life becomes one grind and you don't even like it and you're just using it to escape some of the things in your life that you're not actually proactively handling, then that's not good. And so I think we like to have, grim in the title, because it's like, keep in mind that there is a fine line between those two things, and as long as you're on the right side of that line, and you're willing to work hard towards something that you really find passion in and that ties into something bigger than yourself, hopefully, then that's always worth the work. And I think hard work is built into our DNA as humans. And anyone that tells himself that's not the case is lying. Like, we are not meant to sit on a couch and zone out to like YouTube and TV all day long. Not what we're meant to do. We're meant to be up. We're meant to be doing things, right? That's built into our DNA as humans. And so it ties into well-being and happiness too.
Yeah, I think that's the biggest differentiation when you talk about like grim drive as that relentless pursuit of purpose through passion, and then also workaholism is the workaholic is more of like you use the word escape, and I think that's dead on, right? Like, people will work and work and work to convince themselves that they're being productive, or they're doing what they need to do, and they're grinding it out, right? I hear that word a lot more, grind, especially in the last 3 to 5 years. Everyone has to have like a side hustle or a grind. And if you're just working to work to convince yourself that things are okay, but there's no purpose behind what you're working on, or there's no passion behind it, then that's a problem.
Yeah.
The absence of purpose is really the biggest distinction that I see with grim drive and workaholism. If you are working towards something and putting in the enormous amount of effort, if you see it as something that's purposeful and that you're passionate about, that's very different than just like working for the sake of work. So for us, we are dedicated, our purpose of helping young guys, that is our purpose. And we are passionate about finding any ways, any means possible to try to accomplish that. What birthed the podcast, right? We wanted to reach more people, and so
and not for fame. Like, it's to try. Like, look, in order to help people, we have to talk about these things and educate people about the stuff that we are educated about, because that's going to create a helpful dialogue. This podcast is a lot of work, right? We don't get paid any money. That we spend money to do it, but it's worth it because we're trying to help people. So we dedicate time and do that stuff because, like you said, I mean, it ties into a passion and a purpose that's bigger than us that we're really committed to.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, we've had to tell Joe Rogan, like, pump his brakes. Like, we'll get back to him eventually. You know what I mean? But I think that's
Dimitri, we're not gonna. You're coming with us. Don't worry.
Don't worry. Yeah, when Joe comes on, we'll bring you. But I think that's the biggest thing, and it's interesting because I've been asked that question quite a bit about, like, what is grim drive, or why grim? Why do you put grim in there? Because it does seem so dark. But to your point, it's when you're working towards something that is meaningful, and you don't have a capacity to be adverse through when things are not looking good, then maybe you aren't as passionate about it as you thought you were, right? If you're willing to give up on it or willing to sort of let things go, then that might be an indicator, right? As opposed to, no, it does not look great right now, but I'm going to continue to push through because it is purposeful for me and I am passionate about it. And then through that success of coming out of that continues to push you forward of like, okay, if I can do that, I can recover from that. I know I'm on the right track and I know that it's meaningful to me. And I think the way that I try to describe it is that's usually the distinction that I try to bring it back to when I'm talking to people about this, is that it's just about that absence of purpose and passion, right? And if you have those two, then it's meaningful to push through and work really hard on these types of things as opposed to not.
Yeah, and if a person has a side hustle, I mean, we've talked in that Justin Forsett and financial literacy episode, we talked about track A, track B. We talked about having a plan and trying to really sit down and figure out your why. Yeah. That's what's key, right? If you have a side hustle, your second job, you're working a ton of hours, fine. But is it tied into something? Do you have a plan? Do you have a reason, a purpose for doing it? Or is it just to like say you did it to avoid something else or to look great in front of other people on social media or claim that you work hard? That's the kind of thing where it's like if it's tied into a bigger reason for why you're doing it. There's nothing wrong with doing that kind of stuff. So I totally agree. And at the end of the day, I challenge anyone to start a podcast and actually find a name for a podcast that hasn't been taken. So we had other possible names too. It's like, good luck. The first 20 were like, nope, that's taken. That's taken. We don't do dropping dimes, right? That was like, that was taken. Like, they're all taken. So we always love this term because it's kind of a half joke. And we think it kind of hits on the right things. It touches on the reality of hard work and purpose and what goes into it. But it also has a built-in kind of joke to kind of keep things light and remind you where the line is. So that is where Grim Drive comes from. We appreciate everyone who's listened to us so far. We are over I think we're over 700 downloads right now, which I think is probably not a big deal for most podcasts, but for us, I think that's pretty big. We got our YouTube followers up over 100. We're really appreciative to everyone, including Dimitri and the Go Network. Thank you very much for helping us with this. Again, we're passionate about something bigger than us and bigger than just this podcast. We're trying to help a lot of people, and this is one big part of it. So we're thankful to everyone who's continuing to listen and hear us out and give us a shot and maybe spread the word around about what we're trying to do and the information we're trying to cover, because we hope people get connected to it, because it is we consider, helpful and ultimately free information that might be good for a person to hear out before getting help for themselves, or so that they can be aware that they might need help or that kind of stuff, or just to be proactive about their mental fitness to improve their well-being, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. So we appreciate everyone. Thank you for listening to this episode of the Grim Drive Podcast. We will be back next week to do a quick preview of some of the next episodes to come, and we'll go from there. Thank you everyone.
Thanks.